In this Elden Ring Nightreign video, we're going to be talking about the best weapons for each class or each Nightfare, and specifically against each boss. Not every weapon is effective against every boss. So if you've been wondering like what weapons to look out for and what you should be going for in certain bosses, we're going to go through each one of these classes and make some recommendations. I am going to have specific build guides out for each of these classes later over the weekend and into next week that talk about the exact setups I have in terms of relics, the weapons that I use, and the strategy that I go for when playing each character. But this is just kind of a general, these are what you should be looking for these characters when you're facing such and such boss. First up, we're going to take a look at Wylder, and Wylder is pretty simple when it comes to his weapons. He uses great swords with a different attack animation than every other character in the game. There are a lot of great swords that have their own attacks that are specific to those great swords, but when you're using them on Wylder, you'll always do the same attack pattern no matter what great sword you're using. And since his relic that allows for a follow-up attack after grapple only works with the greatsword, and it's really, really strong, you're typically going to be looking for a greatsword when you're playing Wylder most of the time. It's not always true. You might happen upon a Naga Kiba with like poison and bleed on it, and you might go, wow, that's really good. But generally speaking, you're going to be looking to use a greatsword. Now, there are two greatswords that I look out for on just about any run that I do with Wylder, and these are the Forked Greatsword and the Flambridge. And this is because they have the bleed status effect ailment on them by default, and this can make chewing through field bosses and some of the Night Lords very, very easy, particularly if you have another character in your group that's also focusing on bleed. And what's really great about these is they can have a second status effect. If you get one to drop from like a Frost Ruins or a Poison Ruins, they can also come with those status effects on them, or even Scarlet Rotted, which is very rare. But if you can get one of these that has poison and bleed on it, or frostbite and bleed on it, it's very, very deadly. So when you're playing Wylder, you should be looking for these two weapons, and you should be looking for runes that are poison or frost, trying to see if you can get one of these with a secondary status ailment. Now, the thing about these two weapons is that there are about half the Night Lords are immune to bleed in this game, which means that these weapons are not effective. They have lower attack power because of the bleed status effect than some other greatswords, and because you can't trigger hemorrhage, that effect becomes useless some of the time. So you definitely want to get different greatswords for those bosses. And if you're not using poisoning and bleed on those two weapons, or at least a greatsword with poison, you're typically going to be looking for a greatsword that has holy or lightning on it. There are a lot of holy greatswords out there. There's about 5, and obviously the higher attack power one you can get is the best in those cases. You tend to not use your weapon skills all that often on some of these, but for instance, the Sacred Relic Sword has Wave of Gold, which is a really strong weapon skill. It's very hard to get. Ordovus' Greatsword has a great weapon skill, and Ordovus' Vortex. Those are really good against the first and last bosses, so you'll want holy weapons in those cases. And you may want lightning for the Augur boss or the Darkdrift Knight. And in these cases, there's no real default weapon that has lightning on it, so you're going to have to try and find a lightning-infused sword. It could be one of the two that I mentioned earlier, or it can just be like any other greatsword that's infused with lightning from lightning camps. Also, because lightning is a little bit harder to get because there is no greatsword that defaultly has lightning damage on it, you may consider using a different weapon type if it does have lightning for either of those two bosses, even though I wouldn't normally recommend that. Just getting a lightning weapon in general is better than not having one most of the time. Next, we're going to take a look at the best weapons for Ironeye, and Ironeye is a bit of a strange character because even though there are a lot of bows in this game, not a lot of them are so much better than each other that it's like there's some standout that you must get every time. But there are a couple we're going to look at, and then we're going to talk about a couple other things that affect the way he plays. So the two most notable bows are the Serpent Bow that puts poison on the target by default. This is obviously great for applying poison at range. It has a lot of poison buildup. It's good against Gaping Jaw and any boss that can be poisoned. Not all of them can, so it's not good against every boss. But it's good against at least half the bosses in this game, and that's definitely one you should pick up if you see it. Additionally, the Erdtree Bow is absolutely fantastic against Holy Weak bosses. This is the first boss and last boss. So if you're going to be fighting either of those two bosses, you definitely want to pick up this bow if you see it too. Also, special mention for the Lion Great Bow. If you ever do get this thing is absolutely fucking deadly. The heavy attack on it shoots so many arrows, and Radahn's Rain is really, really strong. I've absolutely wiped out bosses for this weapon, so don't sleep on it. Even though it might be a great bow and shoot slower than you think it should, it's really, really strong, and you definitely want to not pass this up anytime you can get it. Now, when it comes to bosses that are weak to fire or lightning, there are no bows that natively come with these damage types on them, so you have to rely on fire camps or lightning camps in order to try and get a bow that has lightning damage on it or fire damage on it. And it can be very sporadic. In my opinion, you rarely get these. Sometimes you get one with lightning when you're fighting a holy boss. Sometimes you get other stuff. But generally speaking, the best way to offset this is to use relics and apply lightning to your weapon. or apply fire to your weapon, your starter weapon, and then just upgrade that weapon with a blue stone and get a purple stone from a mine and take that weapon into a boss fight. That way you have the weakness guaranteed and you're not leaving it up to chance. That's a much safer bet. Even if your overall damage is slightly lower, your damage in the boss fights should be higher because you're hitting the right weakness of the boss, and you should apply, more effectiveness to your group. Now, you can apply the same strategy with Wylder as well, but I would say the bleed poison strategy works for half the bosses. There are a handful of holy greatswords, so you're almost guaranteed at least one holy greatsword per run, and he can buff his weapon with fire when he uses his follow-up attack with his greatsword, so he really can basically take on anything without having to do that. He doesn't really need to apply this, although he can if he wants. Something else I want to mention about Ironeye real quick, and you can use on other characters as well, is that if you pick up some staff or a seal that has an armament buff on it, you can actually use it periodically to buff your damage, and this is really good a way to increase your damage in this game, particularly because you don't tend to use your FP on weapon skills a lot. There are very few weapons that have good weapon skills in this game that are worth the FP, or you simply don't have the timing window to do it. So this is a great way to add damage to your weapons, and in a lot of cases it can be the elemental type that the boss you're going to be facing is weak to that can solve that problem for you. So don't pass these up just because you're a different class that doesn't use seals or staffs. Take a peek at the spells on them and see if they're an armament buff, and pick it up if no one else is going to use it in order to buff your armament. So moving on to Raider. Raider's preferred weapons are great axes, great hammers, and colossal weapons. He actually has a special moveset with these weapons that's a bit different than your standard moveset, so he'll use them the way he's going to use them, similarly to the way Wylder uses the greatsword differently than other characters as well. So typically you want to prioritize these. The running R2 attack with these weapons is really, really strong in my opinion. It's a great way to get in melee range quickly and deal a bunch of damage. So typically on Raider, you're going to either two-hand one great axe, one great hammer, one colossal weapon, or dual-wield two of the same type. It's important that you dual-wield two of the same type too, because your L1 will attack with both weapons simultaneously if they are the same type of weapon, and it won't if they're different types. And something you should know is that even though Raider's starting weapon is named Great Axe, it's technically a colossal weapon, so you need to dual-wield two colossal weapons in order to use the L1 attack simultaneously, and this also applies to jump attacks. If you want to jump attack and hit with both weapons with L1, you need to be using the same type of weapon. So typically look for two great axes, two great hammers, or two colossal weapons when playing Raider. So when it comes to standout great axes, the first one that comes to mind is Great Omen Killer Cleaver. That's because this weapon has bleed buildup on it, and this is devastating against many of the game's enemies and bosses. Half the Night Lords are immune to bleed, as we mentioned before, so it's not good against every boss, but it's good against a lot of bosses, and it's good against a lot of other bosses that aren't Night Lords, so definitely pick this one up if you see it. The Gargoyle's Black Axe is also a great way for Raider to get holy damage. This is good against the first and the last boss, so if you know you're going to be facing one of those two bosses, you'll definitely want to pick this one up if you see it. So taking a look at great hammers, the first one you should keep an eye out for is the Rotten Battle Hammer. This is kind of red looking, that should be very easy to notice quickly, and that's because this has Scarlet Rot on it. Scarlet Rot is absolutely deadly in this game. You can Scarlet Rot just about any boss. I think all the Night Lords, or almost all the Night Lords, can be Scarlet Rotted as well, and it can make a lot of those fights go more quickly because the damage is ticking away on them. Even when they're zipping all over the screen and you can't melee them, they're still taking damage from your Scarlet Rot. So if you see this one, you absolutely want to pick it up. And another really good great hammer you want to keep an eye out for is Great Stars. This is another one that has bleed buildup on it. Bleed is just so strong, so don't pass this up if you can get it. Now, when it comes to holy bosses, if you're fighting either the first or the last boss, Envoy's Longhorn and Beastclaw Great Hammer are both good. They both have holy damage on them, so if you see them and you're doing either of those two bosses, you definitely want to pick them up. And the Cranial Vessel, Candlestand, and Devour Scepter both have fire damage on them, so if you're fighting either of the bosses that have fire weakness on them, these are also good to pick up in those cases. And again, remember that you can dual wield two of the same type more effectively than not. So like if you were fighting a holy boss, you could take Envoy's Longhorn, and if they are also susceptible to bleed, you could use Great Stars or something like that in the other hand. So you could be getting that holy damage on them and also triggering bleed at the same time. Next in Colossal Weapons is the Rotten Great Axe. And this is very good for similar reasons that the Rotten Battle Hammer is. Scarlet Rot is just so strong in this game. And even if you're playing like Wylder or Guardian and you see this and you have no Raider, you should probably consider picking it up because you can win a lot of boss fights with Scarlet Rot, including a lot of Night Lords, so it's worth taking even in those cases. And the Rotten Staff is also good for the same reason. It has the Scarlet Rot status effect on it, so if you see that one, make sure that you pick it up. Now, Colossal Weapons have a wide variety of damage types on them. The Dragon Greatclaw, for instance, is good for lightning, so bosses like the Darkdrift Knight that are weak to lightning, this is going to be good to have on. Definitely want to get that in that case. Staff of the Avatar has Holy on it, and so does Envoy's Greathorn. If you're fighting any bosses that have a Holy weakness, those are good. And there is also the Prelate's Infernal Crozier that doesn't have fire damage on it by default, but its weapon skill does fire damage, so that's good in a lot of cases as well. And Giza's Wheel is really, really strong in this game, even though it wasn't so strong in the base game. The bleed buildup is really good, and the weapon skill can be used like on a staggered enemy or something like that. You can just hold it down and it'll just keep cranking out damage. So definitely consider this one if you see it too. So moving along to Duchess. Duchess's preferred weapon is daggers, and she has a unique moveset with daggers compared to the other classes that hit more rapidly, although the damage is about the same as a regular dagger combo chain with other characters. She hits a couple more times than they do in that chain, allowing her to take advantage of things that give you like FP on successive hits or HP on successive hits, or in order to apply status effects more quickly, things like that. So you really want to be using at least one dagger if you're playing with her in order to take advantage of that moveset. Additionally, she has a scaling intelligence, which is actually her highest stat, so she can use sorceries effectively. So using a staff with her is also not a bad idea, and we'll get into some spells that are really good for her in a second. But keep in mind one of the things I said earlier about Ironeye, that you can buff your weapon. Her weapon skill allows her to buff her weapon, so you should definitely be doing that at the beginning in order to get more damage. But you can pick up like Scholar's Armament on a staff or something in order to buff a different weapon that she picks up later and to keep getting extra magic damage with her attacks. So taking a look at some of the better daggers, the few that stand out to me immediately are the Bloodstained Dagger, the Wakizashi, and Reduvia. All three of these have native bleed buildup on them, and this allows them to trigger hemorrhage very easily on enemies. And if you're talking about like Bloodstained Dagger and Wakizashi, like if you get poison versions of them or frostbite versions of them, they'll also still have bleed, so they can have dual status effects, and that can be really strong as well. And because you're attacking rapidly, you're going to trigger this very often. So those three you definitely want to be on the lookout for, and if you see one of them, be sure to pick it up. Additionally, Scorpion Stinger has Scarlet Rot on it, and Scarlet Rot is even stronger against harder bosses than bleed is. A lot of the endgame Night Lords, as I mentioned, are immune to bleeding, but not any of them, or like one of them, I think, are immune to Scarlet Rot. So Scarlet Rot is really, really strong in those cases. So if you see the Scorpion Stinger, absolutely pick this up and don't pass it up. And when it comes to holy damage, Blade of Calling and Black Knife are excellent for the first and last boss, so I highly recommend taking one of those if you're facing either of those bosses. They're still really strong weapons in their own right, even if you're not facing holy, particularly Blade of Death, as that can reduce the max HP of a boss, which is really strong, and Blade of Gold is also a really good weapon skill. So you probably want to take these regardless if you see them, unless you're going for like a poison bleed or some sort of status effect build. Now, when it comes to sorceries, again, Scholar's Armament, any staff that has Scholar's Armament on it is good for you because that's going to boost your melee damage and you are going to be meleeing a lot. So definitely look for that on any staff that, may have it. Spells are a bit randomized, so you're never entirely sure what you're going to get. I'm sure there are specific staffs that have specific spells, but basically, when you're looking at a staff, you're going to be looking at its spells more than anything. Obviously, the more sorcery scaling it has, the more damage that staff's going to do. So in an ideal scenario, you'd get a stronger staff with a better spell, but usually the spell is more important than the sorcery scaling because you need to use those spells effectively in order to deal damage. So the first spells you want to look out for are Rancor Call and Ancient Death Rancor. These typically come on the Prince of Death staff, and these spells can home onto a target and follow them a very good distance. You can charge up these spells for extra damage to conserve on FP and still get more damage, and they do good stance damage as well, allowing you to help with stance breaking bosses in order for your team to get a breather and deal a critical strike. Another really good spell is Magma Shot. This typically comes on the Gelmer Glintstone staff. You can shuck this from a long range away. It drops lava on the ground where it lands if it hits the ground, which can deal damage over time to targets standing in it. It's good against targets that are weak against fire, or bosses that have a fire weakness, or bosses like the Erdtree Avatar that are weak to fire as well. It can absolutely make a mockery of those types of bosses. Other spells you want to look out for are Star Shower and Stars of Ruin. These spells are really, really strong, and if you see them on a staff, you definitely want to grab that staff. It can do a lot of damage and a lot of stagger from range, allowing you to help with stance breaks where then you can run in melee safely a lot of the time. Or just, when an opportunity where you can't hit the boss because he's doing something, it can allow you to get some good damage in at range. Common Azure is a strong spell in terms of damage because it can do a lot very, very quickly. The biggest issue with this spell is that a lot of times bosses can move out of it and you can end up doing nothing. So it's a good spell to have as if you can't find any of the other ones, but I don't necessarily recommend it as your go-to spell. Other spells to look out for are Meteorite of Astal. This is really, really good if you don't have aggro on the boss, and if the boss is large, you can just hold this down and drop meteors onto the target, dealing lots of damage and stance damage. It's particularly good for dragons, for instance, if you can get like under them and use it, it'll just stagger them and deal tons of damage to them, wiping them out quickly. Other good spells are like Meteorite, which I think is a weaker version of that spell. Rock Sling is good for dealing physical damage at range and does a lot of stance damage if you can lock onto the head of the target. And Gravity Well is also good for dealing just regular consistent damage if you have the spacing. So next we're going to take a look at Guardian, and Guardian can be a little bit more difficult to gear up because you not only have to look for an appropriate weapon, but you also have to look for an appropriate shield. The guard boost on shields determines how much stamina you're going to consume when you block each attack. Every attack is going to consume a different amount of stamina, but the more guard boost you have, the more efficiently you can block it and still have stamina left. And obviously, Guardian's unique in that his passive ability lets him block attacks consuming even less stamina, so this is even more beneficial to him. And there are passive effects on gear that improve your guarding efficiency that make it so that the guard boost stat increases on all your shields. So you want to be on the lookout for that as well anytime you're doing a run to make your guarding even more efficient. That way you don't get guard broken and take a lot of damage. Additionally, each shield has a certain amount of resistances. Every shield in the game has physical resistance 100%, but a lot of shields have, way less than that for other damage types like fire, lightning, holy, magic, etc. So you want to be aware of what these are, and unfortunately the only way to look at these is in the equipment screen in the sparring ground. This is where you can really take a look at what those resistance are. You'll have to kind of remember some of these, but I'm going to go through some of these in this video to help you get a better understanding of shields. And lastly about shields, the great shields, the shields in the bottom category under armaments in the shields category in the sparring equipment area, have a higher hardness than other shields in the game. And what hardness does is it gives enemies an opportunity to rebuff off your shield when they do an attack chain, like Banished Knights or some other humanoid enemies. Sometimes when they're doing their combo, if you have a great shield, they will attack into you and rebuff, instantly interrupting their combo, giving you an opportunity to block, counter, and things like that, or just counter attack. So this is really, really strong, and ideally you'd be looking for a great shield when playing Guardian, simply because of the hardness factor. So if you have two shields that have the same guard boost, always prioritize the one that's a great shield. So when choosing a shield, your primary factor is obviously going to be guard boost. Most of the attacks in the game are physical. It's not entirely true. Some of the endgame bosses have lots of other damage types. But realistically, you're going to be going for the shield that has the highest guard boost that you can find. There are some shields with special effects on them or weapon skills. And in my experience, I prefer shields that have no skill on them, simply because I like to use weapon skills more than my shield skill. So finding a shield with no skill on it will let you use the weapon skill in your main hand when pressing L2 or the left trigger on your controller without having to swap to two-hand the weapon first. So if you have two shields and they have the same guard boost and they're both great shields, prioritize the one, in my opinion, with no skill first. And keep in mind, too, that you can upgrade your shield using Smithing Stone. So if you can't find any good shield, upgrade the shield that you start with using a purchased Smithing Stone from a merchant or a dropped one, and then get one from the mine to upgrade it to purple. This should get you to around 80 guard boost, which is much better than the 60 that you start with. So this is also an option. I will special mention a couple shields here that I really like. Jellyfish Shield is really strong because its buff, Contagious Fury, increases your attack power for about 30 seconds. And this can just increase your overall damage. And Guardian doesn't have very high damage compared to other classes because he's one-handing most of the time. So this can be a great way to boost your own personal damage. So if you see Jellyfish Shield, absolutely grab it. Another really good shield is the Vicious Shield. The weapon skill on this just spews out fire in front of you while you hold the shield up, blocking attacks simultaneously. This is a great way to bully enemies that are weak to fire, or, if an enemy is being juggled by your team, you can just walk into them and continuously flinch them with fire, and it's really fun to do. And then lastly, the One-Eyed Shield. This is really fun. The weapon skill on it, Flame Spit, will shoot out like a fire projectile when you fire it, giving you some range with your shield. And it's great against fire-weak enemies, or maybe when you just can't get close to the enemy, maybe if it's flying or you're trying to hit the head or a specific body part, you can aim this manually, and it's also another really fun shield to play with. Now, when it comes to weapons, Guardian's recommended weapon is Halberd, and he has a unique moveset with halberds compared to other characters, just like other characters have their weapons. But you don't need to use a halberd with Guardian. In fact, depending on what you can find, there are definitely better weapons out there. But the recommendation that I would make in terms of weapons is finding a weapon type that you can block and attack with simultaneously. And the weapon types that can do this are thrusting swords, heavy thrusting swords, spears, great spears, and of course halberds. And the reason why this is so important, in my opinion, is because it lets you safely attack while also protecting yourself from damage. Bosses can do erratic things when you have 3 players in this game, and sometimes it's hard to see with all the effects on the screen what's happening, and you don't want to let go of block in order to attack as Guardian. Like, your priority should be keeping the boss on you as much as possible and staying alive so your teammates can melee and range into them while the guy just stays in place attacking you. That's your priority. Dealing damage is secondary when playing Guardian, but you still want to deal damage. So the best way to do that is by using one of these weapon types, holding block, and then attacking. And keep in mind that you can use Guardian's passive and go into a steel stance where you're blocking more effectively with your stamina and you can still attack simultaneously at the same time. And that goes a long way. But you have to have one of these weapon types in order to do that. So you're going to want to be looking for one of these 5 weapon types when playing Guardian. There are exceptions where I use other weapon types, like if they have status effects and I haven't found a good one of these types. But usually you want one of these in order to be able to attack and defend yourself simultaneously. So when it comes to thrusting swords, which are my least recommended type just because they have the shortest reach and sometimes it's difficult to hit while you're blocking and poking depending on the body type of the enemy. But one special mention here is Anspur Rapier. This weapon is absolutely deadly in this game, being able to set Scarlet Rot while blocking. And if you just think about it for a second, if you can be Guardian, sit there and hold aggro as much as possible. You know, you can't hold it the whole time, but as much as you can, and set Scarlet Rot over and over, even if you don't attack more than that, just setting Scarlet Rot and then prioritizing defense, you've already added a ton of damage to your team. And keep in mind, you can get this with like poison on it as well, or bleed on it, or frostbite on it. So sometimes you can get this and apply multiple status effects, which is even deadlier. Moving on to heavy thrusting swords, I like these a bit more than thrusting swords because they have longer reach. They are slower attacking, but Bloody Hellas is absolutely devastating. It can trigger bleed so much in this game, and highly recommend getting this one if you see it in order to contribute more damage via bleed. And then Dragon King's Cragblade is another really good weapon. The weapon skill on it is really fun to use. You can use it, again, by blocking and attacking simultaneously, and it has lightning on it. So if your boss is weak to lightning, this is a great one to pick up if you're facing that boss. So when it comes to spears in this game, there are absolutely some fantastic spears. I highly recommend either the Spiked Spear or the Cross Naginata for bleed buildup. This can get you, again, bleed buildup at range while you're turtle behind your shield, which can help increase your damage while still being able to play defensively, so those are both good. The Rotten Crystal Spear is another great way to apply Scarlet Rot while turtling behind your shield. It has longer range than Anspur, so I probably recommend it over that one. And you definitely want to take this one if you can find it. And beyond that, there are a slew of other spears that have different damage types on them, like Inquisitor's Durandole has fire, Bolt of Grand Sax has lightning, Clean Rot Spear has holy, Siluria's Tree has holy. Siluria's skill, too, the skill on Siluria's Tree is really, really strong, has really long range. It's a great skill to get. Mogwin's Sacred Spear has fire, also has bleed on it, which is strong. Vike's War Spear has fire on it. So some of these weapons are really strong against particular boss types that you're facing, and I think Vike's War Spear is the only weapon in Nightreign that has native Frenzy buildup on it, allowing you to be very effective against the Frenzy boss because he's weak to Frenzy. And when it comes to halberds, there aren't that many great halberds in my opinion. There are a few, but generally speaking, I find great spears, and heavy thrusting swords better. The Vulgar Militia Saw is one that's good if you can get quickly. It has native bleed build on it, which can help with your damage, but you do need to upgrade it if you find it because it usually drops at common, so keep that in mind. And Gargoyle's Black Halberd and Golden Halberd both have Holy, which is fantastic for boss fights that are weak to Holy, like the first and last bosses, so definitely consider using one of those two weapons if you haven't found any of the other types that have Holy on them if you're facing Holy weak bosses. Also note that the Dragon Halberd can apply lightning damage as well, which is another good one for lightning bosses, and it can apply Frostbite buildup. If you use its weapon skill, it will buff its weapon for a period of time. So definitely don't sleep on this one either if you're fighting a boss that has lightning as its weakness. So up next is Executor. Executor's recommended weapon is katanas. He has his own unique moveset with katanas compared to other characters, and his Suncatcher skill is a katana, and it operates very similarly to the way one operates. So it kind of makes sense to use a katana if you're going to be using him, or at least a pair of katanas. But you don't have to. You can use other dex scaling or arcane scaling weapons because he has S in both of those, so that's really good. But generally speaking, you're probably going to want to use a katana if you're looking out for him. Now, one of the best things about katanas is almost all of them have native bleed buildup on them by default, including his starter weapon. So you're going to be able to trigger Hemorrhage very quickly from the very beginning of the game, and Hemorrhage is just deadly against so many enemies in this game. So really what you need to be on the lookout for is trying to find usually a katana that also has a second status effect on it, like Poison or Scarlet Rot or Frostbite, all those are really good to have a second status ailment, because then you can trigger both. If you can trigger Hemorrhage and Frostbite while attacking simultaneously, or Poison, it's really good. So definitely, if you're playing Executor, you might want to look for Poison Ruins or Frostbite Ruins, or, you know, if you have the Scarlet Rot event on the map, you can go down there and do the Scarlet Rot Keep and try and get one. I personally like the Nagakiba as one of the best weapons in Elden Ring, period. It has very long reach. The native bleed buildup is really good. It has pretty good attack power. So if you can find like a Poison Nagakiba or a Frost Nagakiba, those are really good options in my opinion, or, you know, even better, Scarlet Rot. Now, the Serpentbone Blade is good to have as a backup because, again, some of the Night Lords at the end of each run are immune to bleed, about half of them. So having Serpentbone Blade will allow you to apply poison in some of those instances where bleed just won't work. So it's not bad having one of these. You should definitely grab it if you see one and just like kind of put it in your backup slot. Moonveil is also really good because of its skill Transient Moonlight. It can give you some range in circumstances where it might be more difficult to get in close. It has shorter reach than the Nagakiba, and it does magic damage. You don't have the greatest intelligence, but a lot of the damage is physical, and it still has the bleed buildup, so that's really good. Rivers of Blood is probably the katana that you're going to want to be looking for most of the time. Its skill Corpse Piler is absolutely deadly at setting the bleed status effect quickly, and it also does fire damage, so it's excellent against bosses that are weak to fire. It's obviously not going to be as effective against bosses that are immune to bleed, though, so you'll have to keep that in mind. Dragon Scale Blade might look terrible at first glance. It has very short reach for a katana. It doesn't have native bleed buildup on it, but it can buff its weapon with Ice Lightning, giving you more damage when you attack, allowing you to apply Frostbite with attacks, and giving you extra lightning damage. So it's good against lightning weak bosses. So if you're fighting a boss like the Darkdrift Knight and you need lightning, this is one you want to be on the lookout for. And Hand of Millennia is obviously very strong. It has bleed buildup and very high attack power. The problem with this weapon is that its weapon skill, Waterfall Dance, has a very, very long animation. You can be staggered out of it quite easily. Bosses are extremely mobile, especially the end-of-day bosses. So I don't recommend using the weapon skill on this weapon. It has very good reach like the Nagakiba, though, so it's just good in general, but the weapon skill is very difficult to pull off without getting hit or just missing. You may have noticed that there is a lightning one with Dragon Scale Blade, there's fire, but there is no holy. So if you're fighting a holy boss like the first or end-of-day boss, I'd recommend either getting Grease or, you know, using the Seal trick and getting like a buff from that can apply holy damage to your weapon, so you can use that in that case. Or in worst case scenario, you can just use a different weapon that has holy on it if necessary. Up next is Recluse. She doesn't have any special weapons recommended or anything like that, but she does have S in Faith and S in Intelligence, so she's going to be spell casting either with Sacred Seals or with Staffs and Sorceries, and she can even use both if she wants. But I would urge that in your run, very early on, figure out which way you're going to lean on that run, and that's because a lot of the passive buffs you get will either boost Incantation effectiveness or Sorcery effectiveness, but there isn't any that boost both usually. It's hard to use both as effectively as using one type. That's not to say you can't in a pinch, but generally you're going to want to try and prioritize either sorceries or incantations depending on what the game is giving you loot-wise. So when it comes to sorceries, you're going to want to look for the similar ones that we spoke about in the Duchess section. These are Rancor Call, Ancient Death Rancor. You're going to want to look for Magma Shots, Star Shower, Stars of Ruin, Comet Azure, and gravity sorceries like Meteorite of Astal or Meteorite, Rock Sling, Gravity Well. All these are great spells, and you'll probably be using them most of the time. Like if you can get any of these spells, like even just one of these spells, you're usually good to go, but if you can get two, that's even better. Ricard's Rancor is also a good spell to get. And really, that you're not so worried about the staff that you're getting on Recluse. You're more worried about the spells that you're getting. And if you get a blue staff that's got the spell that you want or one that's working really well for you, then you would probably be best just to go upgrade that, getting a purple smithing stone from a mine and not worry about switching staffs. Now, if you decide to go the incantations route on Recluse and you kind of prioritize those because of the spells you're getting and the buffs that you're getting, there are a few that work really, really well. These are Lightning Spear. This is a really good spell, particularly if you're going to be facing a Lightning Weak boss. Black Flame is good if you need fire, and it just does really good damage at range. Flame Sling is also really good for fire damage and range. And keep in mind that like these three spells can all be charged, so you should be charging them if you can to deal increased damage. It makes the most out of your FP. So ideally one of those three would be your typical ranged attack spell, and then you kind of have your bigger spells that you'll use like Burno Flame. This is really good for AoEing large groups of enemies or getting under a large boss like a dragon. You can absolutely slaughter it with it, deals fire damage. Scarlet Aeonia is great for setting Scarlet Rot. If you see this one on something, you definitely want to grab it. Again, a lot of the boss fights in this game are made trivial by Scarlet Rot, and if you can contribute that in your group, you absolutely should. Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike is another good one for big groups or big bosses, particularly dragons if you can get under them, as it can hit multiple times with multiple lightning strikes, dealing very high burst damage if you get a good spread of the lightning. Dragon Claw and Dragon Maw are good sources of physical damage. They have a decent amount of AoE. They do a lot of stance damage as well, and they have a lot of hyper armor on them, meaning that you can tank through hits with them. This isn't always ideal on Recluse because she doesn't have a ton of health, but it will prevent you from being interrupted if you should happen to get hit, as long as you don't die, which is nice. And you can just chain spam these on bosses that are getting bullied in order to speed up how fast they go down. And another good one is Scouring Black Flame. This is just an AoE that's very useful against groups of enemies. It's not the greatest spell, but you can definitely use it. So I've saved Revenant for last, and Revenant doesn't have any special weapons either, just like Recluse. But she plays a little bit differently because she has to melee a bit more, predominantly because she doesn't have a way to recover her FP the way that Recluse does. And you shouldn't be meleeing a lot with Revenant in my experience, because usually what happens is you go to a boss, you dump your FP into that boss as quickly as you can with your spells. Hopefully your team's piling onto it and it bursts down, and then you just replenish your FP at the site of grace afterward, and then, kind of repeat this for boss. It is a bit different with the end of day bosses and the final Night Lord because they have more HP and you can't burst them down with your FP bar. So Starlight Shards are good in that instance, or having a way to recover FP is good, or having an effective melee weapon is good in those cases as well. So in terms of spells, she's going to use incantations because she has S and Faith scaling. She doesn't have the intelligence scaling that Recluse does. She does have some intelligence scaling, but it's not nearly as good as Recluse, so she should prioritize Faith. The same spells that I just mentioned for Recluse are the ones you want to look out for on her, so prioritize those spells. When it comes to Revenant's melee weapons, you can use really anything you want, but I would make some suggestions in the sense that if you have the buff or relic that gives you FP back on successive attacks with a particular weapon type, or anything with a particular weapon type, you should focus on that. That way you can gain FP back, especially if it's a rapid attacking weapon like claws or fists or something. That can work really well for regaining your FP and allowing you to continue to chuck FP spells at bosses during their fights. That's definitely a valid strategy. Or anything that has a status effect on it, so you can contribute some damage by hitting really quickly, putting a status effect on a boss, and then maybe backing away and casting some spells, etc. And you just got to be very careful when you're meleeing with Revenant, because she doesn't have a huge health pool and she doesn't have the dodges that Duchess has. So you definitely want to make sure that, when you get in there, you're doing something like setting a status effect and then backing away, or maybe regaining some FP and then casting spells are ideal. So that wraps up our video on best weapons for each class, for each boss. I hope you guys got something useful out of this. It's not always an exact science which weapon to use. A lot of times you're picking the best from the pool that you can get, but I hope I made some recommendations. A lot of these weapons, particularly the blue weapons that you've seen, you can get almost on every run. The purple weapons are obviously a lot less guaranteed, but if you can make a good build out of blue weapons and upgrade them to purple, you can have more consistency in your runs, and it's definitely not a bad idea to focus on some of them. As always, if you have other tips for best weapons, maybe something I missed, or if you have questions about best weapons for a particular character or class, let me know in the comments below, and I will try and respond as soon as I can.